And I think now is the question has to do more of how we, not only as architects, are serving somehow the power, but also how we can imagine social and spatial transformations as a possibility to challenge power, as a possibility to challenge dominant narrations. But I think on our side, what would be interesting to think about is not to give for granted the relation, with the clients, and not to give for granted the relation that we have only to look at the profit. We have only to understand architecture as a sort of commercial, in its commercial dimension. Because again, I think historically was not like that. So I think it's much more a kind of condition of today in which architecture has been deprived for this incredible power that it had to imagine a different society and actually to give shape to something that, otherwise it remains as a discourse, And that is why, for me, so much linked to the social and the political aspect. There is no political idea that is not that doesn't imply a sort of spatial dimension, and vice versa. You cannot think about a kind of spatial transformation without understanding that this is also imply as political consequences and social consequences. So it's a bit tricky question. Architects, slowly there are more and more trying to come up with some sort of, regulations that there are works, that you should not do. But still, we have this idea, sometimes to justify, if I not do this work, there will be someone else doing it, And I think for me, saying that, you will not do something because, you have certain understanding of your role in the society, I think it's equally important in relation to the fact that actually you cannot always say yes. I mean, there's this idea of yes architecture, which is, very much embraced neoliberalism on the idea that, everything is an occasion, everything is a potential, everything is innovation. No, because, I think there are some architects that can be definitely, and they have, in the recent history of, in which the war became an urban warfare, I think also architects can be accused of violation of human rights. And I think that, to me, it's an important aspect that actually says that how architecture is relevant and how the role of the architect is socially relevant. Because if you can go in jail, I think it's a good sign that actually what you do, it actually can affect people by definition. So who is claiming that there is no relation means that in theory you can do an architect without committing crime? I don't think so. I think that's and this nature of these crimes can be extended into several levels. In a way, it's also how, for example, by participating in an urban renovation that is presented as a great transformation of a city, you are participating in, for example, displacing people, producing refugees. At this, for example, in a moment in which that I think is also important that we are able to recognize that there are other knowledges that have been marginalized. They are not even, in some cases, considered knowledge. That actually is a way for us to re-energize our profession. That can re-energize the possibility for us to make the work relevant, because it's relevant then for actually the people that are gonna use that. And again, to me, there are so I also don't believe into this sort of didascalic way of understanding our role, as someone that is just responding to the need. I still believe, for example, what we, in a very difficult way, I've learned in my own, practice, that the best thing for me and for the people that I work with, in which we were challenging each other. I, in a way, was inspired by the conversations, and I was coming up with propositions that were somehow also for them not expected. That and I'm sure, that is to me kind of self-evident, but it seems that is not for so many people, that if you really want to go to the core of certain issues related to architecture, these are not necessary in where there is wealth, are not necessarily there. I'm not saying that in some cases might be also there, but in other cases you have to have that sort of maybe autonomy of really engage certain situations that allowed also a way of understanding architecture that is embedded in social and political ideas, and therefore then make architecture being relevant. I think I find incredibly important when you actually have the possibility to do things, that you understand how your actions are inscribed into a larger understanding of the situation. That is, for example, always the critique that I had with activists that had a sort of that have an understanding of what is politically relevant only in relation to the actions and to the now, which makes their practice important in certain ways. But also I felt frustrated by the absence of historical perspective, the absence of understanding, even if you operate with good intention, you can be part of horrible things. So activists had this sort of assumptions, of having, a moment in which we try to understand how the thing that we developed there could be relevant, the places, and how we continue to have the at least the feeling, at least this was definitely the feeling that I had, that the work in Palestine was relevant in a way that is not just about your work, but how the project that you do are part of a bigger struggle. That, for example, is very challenging now at the moment for me to think how that could be in other places. I feel I have to, let's say, write about a specific problem. And it had, that is the aspect which is interesting, which is always a proposition about the future. And this is, I think, it's a damnation that we have. Because, if you are a philosopher, you are a sociologist, a theorist, or, you can look to things and you can spend time, in say how things, will not work. But we know that we have, despite everything, to propose something, it will not be accepted, you as an architect say, describe the reality as it is, and bring people to say, yeah, definitely we are in this reality. And then what? No, I think in many other, let's say, activities, you might have, you are legitimized, to even actually is already a great thing if you get into a point in which you say, this is reality that we live in. But we as architects, it's never enough. It's never enough to say, this is what I understood from our contemporary situations. But there is always this sort of call, which, how you engage that situation, how, if you see things that somehow you wanna change, how you do it, and that makes, our profession very difficult and very complicated, but also, going back to the first point, very relevant, because in a way that is also a great possibility, to envision something which is different from what exists today, and makes things tangible at the personal level, this way or in the other way. And that is only architecture can do that. And that for me was the political discussion architecture can shift. Because if you have a political meeting about that, you are stuck. because you don't see anything than the reality. But if you bring models, if you bring drawings, people don't talk about that is not happening. And to the point that, you know, when people saw the model, you know, how we imagined, you know, the possible reuse, for them was done. You know, that was the new reality. That is an incredible power architecture have. And therefore, politically, imagine the power of it, you know, that you have a conversation, you know, by having just a conversation, and then suddenly when you bring what is drawings, models, you know, things that architects use, the whole conversation completely shift, completely, right? So you suddenly, you are not there in this kind of opposition. I don't know if, you know, because the government will never change, you know, you are too naive. And the moment you have a model, people were, and actually you realize that was also the moment for us of going back to architecture, because before, you know, we're much more into, you know, writing and creating a space for architecture to be. But that was for me a way to go back to architecture, because I saw how architecture can be used to mobilize political idea, you know, really to mobilize political imagination, because, you know, that was a language that all the people that are not architects, they don't have. They are incapable of understanding how, for example, we have colonial houses built for settlers, and you can transform them, you know, in a collective building for Palestinians to be reused. That was something that is not in the mind of, you know, a normal person, because, you know, it's not their profession. The moment we, you know, show how to do that, that was for them, again, not how, you know, if that was going to happen. No, we want that to be more, you know, smaller, or, you know, we want a window here, or that. That was only the way how you do it. Is not anymore the point if that thing is going to happen. So I come to realize that the city is not just built in this idea of public and private completely separated from, but in between, there are so many different other ways, you know, of understanding the relation with the space that were completely erased from this kind of conceptualizations, you know, that is reproposing this dichotomy, you know, of top-down, the community and the state and all of that. So for me, you know, the first operation in that case needs to be done is really trying to understand which categories, you know, we can use that are closer to our experience, are closer to our understanding of what is, you know, the space that we live in. That is not, you know, necessarily constituted by, you know, this simply dichotomy between private and public, you know, expressive dimension. And maybe one of our tasks is, you know, you start to look at the different possibility in which you have a different organization that in a way operates a different scale. There is not just the scale of the community, because otherwise we reduce ourselves, you know, into this very localized struggles. And I think what is happening now, which is interesting, how this very localized struggles start to be connected. And it's about sovereignty. That is the discourse that I'm interested in, you know, self-determination, sovereignty, more than, you know, community that in a way then in a one another have to accept that there is always this figure of the father, that the state, you know, at that level, that is what actually matters, you know. So we have somehow to possibly to reopen this this understanding, you know, in which we claim different moment of self-determination, autonomy from the state itself, you know, that not everything needs to be channeled to that. And that has to do very much with our formation as architects sometimes, you know, because we constantly, you know, thinking about, okay, myself as an architect, either I work, you know, with private clients or I work in the name of the state. So if you're a little bit leftist, you know, you might want to be a little bit with the state. And I think that is a simplification, doesn't correspond to the multiplicity of actors of today. You know, today there are, the situation is much more, it's different than that in some ways. So